Welcome to the Space Investment Quarterly, your view into what's shaping the space capital markets. I'm Chad Anderson, here with Justice Killian, and for the next 30 minutes, we are going to review our latest Space IQ report to discuss where the capital is flowing, the key milestones, and what all of this means for the future of the space economy. So this was a massive quarter in a massive year. Let's dive right into the details. So the last decade in the space economy was defined by promise. In the next decade, it will be defined by utility. It's less about accessing orbit and more about what you do when you get there. So we are no longer building the railway, we are running the trains now. And so I think this is a really important sort of transitionary period that helps set the backdrop for where we are in 2025 going into 2026. So the headline numbers, this was a massive year. 2025 set an all-time record with $55 billion invested. And even with macro headwinds, Q4 saw 17 billion invest through 135 different rounds. So it's important to remember that the U.S. government was shut down for half the quarter, right? It was the longest government shutdown in history, the Great Freeze. It grounded aviation, furloughed federal employees. A lot's happened since then, so it feels like distant memory, but that wasn't that long ago, and it really impacted things. But the commercial space sector decoupled and actually accelerated through this. So I think that was really interesting proof point of the resilience of the category, which we talk about a lot, and also, putting up record numbers. Looking forward into 2026, there's three big trends that we wrote about. One of which is what we're calling the Netscape moment for deep tech and for the space economy, which is the SpaceX IPO. Conditions are aligning. They got 10 million plus subscribers for Starlink. They got a roadmap on direct to sell that's really capturing a large portion of the global telecom market. And they've got now this orbital data center narrative is allowing them to tap into the mother of all narratives, which is AI, right? So this wouldn't just be a listing. This is transformational for the market. Could make it. We'll put out our predictions for 2026. Think that this could be it will be one of the top 10 most valuable companies in the world. We'll have to see how things play out, but this is going to be huge. And as we talk about here amongst the team, this could have a lot of ripple effects, like reprice the market, get a lot more institutional capital interested, get a lot more companies interested in listing themselves.
Yeah. It's still early, but cautiously optimistic that this moves ahead. And like you were saying, the ripple effects and the significance for the space economy, cannot be overstated, right? We opened up this conversation by saying we're in a new era. Like that SpaceX IPO firmly solidifies, like this is now, space used to be contrarian, a place where billionaires lost money. Now space is the place where potentially trillionaires are made, right? Like it's a major shift. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about those ripple effects and what they could mean, not only for, asset prices, but also what it means for talent and unleashing the potential with, some of that talent and some of the ripple effects that could be there. So we could be on the precipice of a new super cycle of founders and, builders really taking on some big, exciting, interesting problems.
Dive into that a little bit, because talent's a big part of our offering here at Space Capital. We've been tracking, we like to invest in SpaceX founders. We've been tracking the folks that have, have tenure at SpaceX and then go on to do other things. We've invested in a bunch of founders who have done that, and we've been tracking them, and they've been growing. And now it looks like this could be a sort of a seminal moment where we see a whole lot of them going out and starting new companies.
Yeah, I think that's right. The SpaceX mafia has already been incredibly active, right? There's hundreds of founders out there, raised tens of billions of dollars. But a lot of these alums have faced sort of liquidity challenges. Like since a lot of their shares in SpaceX, a private market, like they can't choose when and how much to sell, and they can't borrow against those shares. And so some of the risk of starting an early company, they can't really access that liquidity. And so having some of that liquidity, having some of those options, does just open up a world of possibility for, some of the best and brightest, right? To step back and say, what are the big problems? What are the interesting problems? What do we want to tackle next? And so, space will be a huge benefactor of that. Historically, looking at the data, we've seen about a third of that talent stay within space and tackle big, interesting problems. And so, we expect that trend will likely continue, and that's going to bode well for their knowledge of where the SpaceX roadmap is going and how to complement that as the space economy grows is going to be incredibly exciting. So.
Yeah, I mean, so when we look back on the most important moments in the space economy, the most transformational moments, the things that have really sort of tipped the scales, I think this one's going to be high on the list. And for a company that has big ambitions, they've not wavered from their plans of getting to Mars and setting up infrastructure and operations there, tapping the public markets and getting some significant capital in order to sort of help speed up that process is going to be big. So the other big theme looking forward to 2026 is the AI energy crisis. So the narratives of space and AI are colliding around energy and the fact that terrestrial grids are strained by escalating compute. I mean, the demands of AI are such that, they're talking about opening up 3 Mile Island. They're looking into nuclear. Everyone's, looking for all types of solutions to this problem. And a whole lot of people are now starting to look up to orbit to help solve this challenge. SpaceX is chief among them. Again, this is kind of a key narrative of their IPO story. And now we've seen a whole bunch of other companies talking about the same thing. So it feels like this is a key talking point. Everyone seems to be talking about orbital data centers. There is a lot of engineering hurdles that need to be overcome for that to make sense. We need some things to happen in order for it to make economic sense, right? The launch costs need to come down significantly. So like this doesn't really work on the current sort of Falcon 9 launch paradigm that we're in. We're going to need Starship to come online. That's a key part of the equation. So we think Starship's going to come operational this year. And when they do so, they can start launching this type of infrastructure. I think it's going to be a while before those launches are available to customers, and then even maybe longer for, for the pricing benefit, like the lower cost actually pass through to the consumer or to the customer. And like, as we've seen over the last 10 years with Falcon 9 and the fact, that they continue to bring the cost down, but it's not like they're lowering their prices, right? But with more competition, we'll see some pricing pressure, but there's not a whole lot of competition at the Starship scale.
Yeah. No, I think that the point around energy and the coupling with AI is super interesting. I mean, when we just step back and sort of look at, I would say, deep tech trends, like energy was a huge one this year. There's, a ton of work being done in reviving, fission technology, containerizing that to make it more mobile. And some of those architectures are designed to translate, over into space. And so one of the rounds this quarter was Antares's Series B, a really interesting company that, has space ambitions and is sort of built to be able to operate both terrestrially and in space. So, the idea that the grid is strained on Earth and, that we're shifting into a new paradigm of sort of infrastructure development in space, we're going to need a grid in space. And we saw companies over this past year both looking at like, how do we capture photons on orbit and like beam that energy back down to Earth? Or how do we direct it to, key use cases or customers in space? And so, that energy foundation is really interesting if you're looking to grow new markets, that particularly at a much larger scale. And I mean, AI's, we could go deep on that one. Super interesting. A lot of talk, a lot to think about there.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, look, this is going to be the talk of conference circuits. It's going to continue out throughout this year. Look, the thesis is really seductive, right? There's a lot of power in space. The sun is big and the energy is plentiful, right? But it's a little bit more complicated than just, data centers hot, space cold, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of engineering challenges, hurdles that need to be overcome. And I think that we're going to start to see some of that happen this year. I think we're going to see some pilot programs and some experimentation from some of these hyperscalers, working with new solutions. We've already seen some of that come out. Google's looking here, all the big names, Jeff Bezos, Elon, Google, Eric Schmidt. everyone seems to be testing this. I don't know that we're going to see any operational systems this year, but it's certainly going to be a key topic of conversation. One of the other key areas is around Golden Dome and geopolitics, right? So from an investment perspective, geopolitics has set a floor for the space economy, right? There is a significant amount of capital that is available for solutions that are essential for economic growth and national security. So again, this is helping to prove the resilience of the category, which, you know, we talk about a lot here, where there's a lot of growth in the commercial side of things, but on the government side, there's also growth, and that money is countercyclical. So look, Golden Dome, like if 2025 was the year the Golden Dome was announced, you know, 2026 is the year where the architecture starts to take shape, where contracts and capital actually starts to flow, you know, and then key to all of that is maneuverability, right? The US government is no longer interested in sitting duck spacecraft, you know, that you launch and they're just on their orbital trajectory and that's it. You know, you need to be able to move around for offensive and defensive capability. If you want to be servicing satellites, you need that. If you want to be inspecting satellites, you need that. If you want to be a responsible steward in orbit and like avoid your neighbors, right, and avoid collisions, you also need maneuverability. So I think maneuverability is key and is going to be the currency going forward, especially as the number of satellites in orbit continues to grow as these new heavy launch vehicles come online and they launch ever more thousands of satellites, right? And we continue to see this growth. And, you know, our portfolio company, Impulse Space, is right at the center of that, providing this capability to the government and to commercial users.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think Golden Dome, what got me so excited about the announcement of it is twofold. One, space defense market has underpinned a lot of the space economy since its inception, right? I mean, that's the reason we went to space from the beginning. The announcement of Golden Dome effectively doubled that market, at least for, you know, the foreseeable future, right? And you saw a number of big rounds raised to sort of compete and go after that and be credible, right? To go head to head with the big primes and get the access to that money. You know, the belief that a lot of the small companies will be able to compete and get facility level clearance and do that, you know, we saw in every pitch deck. It's going to be a harder thing, but there will be, you know, some new companies that really compete for this, and it'll be incredibly exciting. So that doubling of that defense market is an incredibly powerful narrative and allowed crossover capital to come, more investors to come in and really support that.
Certainly underpinning a lot of valuations that we're seeing out there in the market. Yeah.
I think the other thing that was, you know, I think exciting and attracted a lot of attention was this sort of idea of the United States sort of regaining their risk tolerance and taking big bets when it comes to space. And, you know, I like that thinking of really pushing the boundary and seeing what we can do that's possible and really taking on that sort of engineering challenge. And, you know, I think we have the industry and the talent base to be able to, you know, accomplish big things. And it's good to see, you know, that type of challenge being extended. So,
yeah. Okay. Staying on geopolitics, there's also another big development that's happening this year where there's a lot of focus back on the moon. So China is launching a robotic mission to the lunar South Pole. And if you've been following along, you know that this is prime real estate on the moon. This is where the water ice is. This is where, you know, you have 24/7 moon hours access to the sun, right? So you have continuous access to energy and where the valuable resource, which is water, is. And so this is the same place that the U.S. wants to set up their moon base that NASA is working to establish. And they've got Artemis 2 is launching humans around the moon for the first time in 50 years. So I think that this is really going to, you know, when China lands, this is really going to stoke the geopolitical conversation and continue to put more attention and resources on this race to, you know, secure the ultimate high ground and start to build out the infrastructure on the moon. And, you know, at the same time, the International Space Station is retiring, you know, and commercial players are stepping in to fill that gap. Focus for NASA is now going to the moon. And you can kind of think about the moon base as like this, you know, permanently crewed, rotating crew that's going there, similar to what we're doing to, you know, with the ISS today. So anyway, this is kind of one of those things that you might think is way out in the future, and it's not. It's happening like now and then over the next few years.
You got 3 CLIPS missions just off the top of my head, or 4 probably. So you got Astrobotic, you've got Firefly, and then, you know, I think Blue Ghost is also scheduled to go. So, I mean, you've got, these incredible, CLIPS missions. You've got LTVS that's going to be awarded around how like the astronauts will actually be able to navigate the surface of the moon. Yeah, there's a ton happening there.
This is becoming a real
Artemis
interesting
2, yeah.
market.
So,
An area where we've, opportunistically put some dollars, but it's, there's real money now
yeah, a lot
flowing into this.
happening.
All right, so that's kind of look forward. Now, thinking about really what shaped things in this last quarter, the market is clearly bifurcating from sort of tourist capital to industrial capital. And all of this follows on all of the, the talking points that we've been saying before, where it's going from promise to utility, tourist to industrial, like this real bifurcation, this real sort of transitionary period. One of the reasons why is that infrastructure, and particularly launch, is no longer a single player game. So there's a few things going on. One is, obviously there was a record number of launches in 2025, but there's new vehicles that are coming online. So this is now flipping to be a buyer's market, right? Where when competition comes online, we're going to start to see some of that pricing, benefit flow through to the customer. And we expect that to continue to create more demand for launch. And at the same time, SpaceX is moving the goalposts with Starship, but there is some heavy lift competition as well. Blue Origin successfully landed New Glenn in Q4. So we have now officially entered the era of competition in heavy launch as well, and no longer reliance on a single provider, which again is going to be really important, because if you want to see those cost savings, like the lower launch cost, be passed through to the customer, you need competition to sort of force the hand.
Yeah. I mean, it was a beautiful launch, and the landing was incredible. And to see that methane LOX, how clean the booster was,
Yeah.
The reusability factor, it seems, just from the surface, it appears that it's going to be a much faster pathway for them than it was, with Falcon 9. So it's going to be incredibly exciting to watch, and, that cadence, and if they can pick up the tempo and start launching other people, like that'll be foundational to competition, right?
Yeah. So we thought that was a pivotal moment in the quarter. We put it on the cover of the report. Legacy consolidation. So it's interesting to see, again, as the new entrants come in and reshape the space economy, to see how the incumbents have reacted or not. And just in time for Halloween in Q4, there was the announcement of the European Frankenstein, which is a combination of their three large space defense primes in response to SpaceX and in an effort to compete. I think the jury's still out on whether the sum of its parts are going to be, the whole is going to be greater than the sum of its parts, but we'll see. My perspective, I mean, this is sort of a tacit admission of defeat. And another one, that's kind of what happened this last quarter. Tori Bruno, CEO of ULA, went to go lead the defense business at Blue Origin, which that was a development right at the end of 2025. And so we're predicting in 26 that the company's going to struggle to find someone who's going to want to step in and fill that role, given the company's prospects. And, I think that that's probably going to end up in the hands of private equity at a distressed sale.
Yeah. Feels like Cost Plus is like on its last legs. So, yeah.
Okay. And then all of that, I mean, just looking, again, we talked about the high level numbers, but in infrastructure, there was $22 billion invested in 2025. Huge numbers for infrastructure. And we expect to see that continue into next year, I think. Again, based on the growing commercial demand and the growing government budgets, the focus on defense, and everything else that's going on. So,
I mean, the market for space infrastructure has grown significantly in the last year. With defense and AI and data centers, there is room for more capital to be invested here.
Yep. And we're just unlocking new market opportunities all the time.
Yeah.
AI data centers chief among them.
Yeah.
All right. So applications was also a big one that we should touch on, right? And the rise of world models. So geospatial intelligence saw a massive surge of investment to 25 billion. And again, applications is the software that is leveraging the infrastructure that's in orbit to deliver applications and products for end customers, right? This is really another one of those areas where space and AI is converging. We're no longer just looking at static imagery. Companies are feeding proprietary space data into world models, which is one really important input into a collection of inputs into world models that's enabling this new era of physical AI, right? Not just LLMs and chatbots on your screen. It's we're talking about AI for the physical world, which is enabling autonomous vehicles, autonomy more broadly, robotics, et cetera. So space technology, from the geospatial to the satellite communications and everything else, sort of plays a really key, precise positioning plays a key role in enabling this new world.
I mean, those are exactly the markets that are benefiting. The defense market as they move to more autonomous, the robotics platforms that are becoming more autonomous, drone platforms. As robots start to navigate and automate the physical world, you got to know where you're at, when you're at, and where you're going. And so, yeah, I mean, it's incredibly exciting to see these world models abstract away that complexity and really make it much more accessible to a broader base. We've been talking about this for a long time. We didn't know exactly what form it would show up, but this is it. This is how people can utilize this data much more effectively.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see it playing out in different venues, like at CES. It's interesting to see how it's playing out in AEC, like in construction and earth movers and autonomous vehicles on job sites. This is a solution that is providing a product and solution for massive, massive industries that are here on
Transform
Earth.
those industries, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot
Status
of
quo doesn't
opportunity.
work anymore.
All right. So what does this mean in terms of exits and liquidity? Record exits. In addition to a record in capital flows, record in exits as well. Investors realized $49 billion across 99 exits, 91 of which were acquisitions and 8 were IPOs. And the value is increasing too. So infrastructure exit value was $1.3 billion, and it set a new record for acquisition count. There was 50 acquisitions in infrastructure alone last year. So that's really interesting to see, because we've kind of gone through this trough over the last few years, right? Where we've seen the number of acquisitions really skyrocket. We've had the last few years, we've seen record acquisitions, right? But then the value has stayed really low, which means that, the weakest among us were, not cutting it. Now the acquirers are seeing value and paying premiums again for where they perceive value. So that's really promising for the future. And then also thinking about the IPO window going forward. So 2026 could be strong for IPOs. We saw a few companies go public, like we just mentioned last year, although they've really struggled to sort of maintain their list price. Going forward, I think already in the first part of this year, just in the first, couple weeks, we've seen the SpaceX IPO and the talk of a SpaceX IPO really just lifting all boats. Almost every company in this category is benefiting from that buzz. And so you can kind of start to see how much appetite there is and where this thing could go. And, we've talked about this already, but a successful SpaceX IPO listing could reprice the category. It's already starting to do that, and could unleash a wave of new listings that are trying to draft behind this giant.
Well, yeah, I've heard that, Bloomberg reported that there's something like $3 trillion that's sort of lined up to potentially list in 2026. SpaceX is one of them, but, you've got Stripe and OpenAI and Anthropic, and, that's an incredible amount of value in the private markets that would be shifting to the public markets. That creates liquidity for those underlying LPs. If that is, if space is the largest one, sort of exit event in that sort of broader category, a lot of that money then flows back to the investors looking to redeploy it, right? And so it means a whole new wave of investors now sort of looking at space from contrarian to consensus and really saying there's money to be made here, and let's double down. So incredibly exciting.
Yeah. All right. So closing thought. We are in the middle of a massive transition where we stop counting launches and start looking at what those launches are delivering, what infrastructure it's enabling. So the bottleneck's no longer getting to space. It's building the industrial base once we're there. For the savvy investor, 2026 this is not just another year of development that's coming up. This is the foundation for the next decade of alpha. We have had a really powerful 10 years of building. The next 10 years is going to be a brave new world. It's going to be, like you said, from contrarian to consensus. We've got proof points that we've never had before. this is, the opportunity is way bigger than I think a lot of people initially sort of think when they think about space technology and what this means. It's the invisible backbone powering the global markets here on Earth. The world's largest industries are powered by space technology, and it's also opening up all this new infrastructure in orbit and beyond, which is, incredibly exciting. So, okay, well, we're out of time, so we'll leave it there. As always, you can find the Space IQ report. It's available on our website along with an interactive data set for free at spacecapital.com. So make sure to go and check that out. And thanks very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Let's get back to work.